My name is Belle Jarneski, and I am the Executive Director of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada. Welcome to the Holocaust and Human Rights Symposium, which the Jewish Heritage Center has been hosting right here at Duckworth Center of the University of Winnipeg for 19 years. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we're gathering this morning is Treaty 1 territory, located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. May we live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with its peoples. To open the proceedings this morning, I'd like to call on Dr. Annette Trimby, President and Vice Chancellor, who will bring greetings on behalf of the University of Winnipeg.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the University of Winnipeg. 19 years. We're very pleased that you continue to have the symposium on our campus. We're proud to partner with the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada in teaching young people about what happened during the Holocaust. You may feel that that happened a long time ago, but it is important for all of us to understand that the society this happened in wasn't remarkably different from the one we live in today, and the death of millions of people was only made possible by the complacency of millions of others. If you watch the news, you will see regular reminders from around the world that not only does persecution still exist, it is being actively ignored. In many cases, it takes the form of aggression and abuse against marginalized communities. I'm really encouraged that you are here today. I know so many students who are engaged in issues of equality and who care deeply about living in a just world where human rights are upheld. Simon Wiesenthal, a Holocaust survivor, said that for evil to flourish, it only requires a few good people to do nothing. This is an important reminder for all of us, and we know it starts with education. At the University of Winnipeg, we believe in the power of education and care deeply about making the world a better place. We are a community that understands the importance of positive action and accepting responsibility for the things we can improve. Each one of us must have the courage to use our influence to serve others and to work to create a better world. I know that each of you are already making contributions, and I know that you will continue to do so. I'd like to acknowledge the people who are contributing to a better world by making it possible for you to be here today. I want to thank your teachers. I want to thank your principals. I want to thank Belle Jarneski and the Freeman Family Foundation Holocaust Education Center for organizing this event. And I want to thank all of our speakers, especially our keynote speaker, Edith Kimmelman, a Holocaust survivor, who will share her story of survival and resilience in impossible conditions while finding the courage to achieve a better life. And I'm also proud to say that she is a University of Winnipeg graduate. And I want to acknowledge this afternoon you will be hearing from Theodore Fontaine, who is a member of the Saging Ojibwe First Nation and is a residential school survivor. So thank you for sharing your experience. Again, welcome to our campus, and thank you for being engaged and passionate about making a contribution towards the greater good. Miigwech.
Thank you, President Trimby. I'd like to acknowledge all of those who have helped to make this day possible. Our generous sponsors, the University of Winnipeg, the Grossberg Fund of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, the Asper Foundation, and the continuous support that we receive throughout the year from the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg. I'd like to thank the Holocaust Education Committee of the Jewish Heritage Center and also Stan Carboni and Andrew Morrison at the Jewish Heritage Center office, who provide helpful research, advice, and support always. A very special thank you to our wonderful Holocaust survivors, some of whom are here with us today, and many of whom continue to give graciously of their time, telling and retelling their personal stories to students as young as 11. We are very honored by your presence among us today. You are not only symbols of survival, but of resilience. You have witnessed humanity at its very worst, and yet you have become voices for dignity, tolerance, and decency. 75 years ago, on January 27, 1945, the very gates of hell were flung open by the Red Army. At least 1.1 million people, some 90% of them Jews, were murdered at Auschwitz, the largest of the Nazi death camps. In the weeks before liberation, thousands of prisoners were shot, tens of thousands more forced on death marches, and about 7,000, mostly sick, starving, exhausted, and dying prisoners remained. But Auschwitz-Birkenau was one of 6 death camps, factories of death created as part of the so-called final solution to the Jewish question. More than 3 million Jews were murdered in the 6 death camps alone. The Einsatzgruppen, or mobile killing units, murdered another 1.4 million Jews in mass shootings in the East. But these were not the only places where Jews and other prisoners were killed or died of starvation and disease. From its rise to power in 1933, the Nazis built a series of detention facilities to imprison and eliminate so-called enemies of the state. Most prisoners in the early concentration camps were German communists, socialists, social democrats, Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay men, and persons accused of so-called asocial or socially deviant behavior. When the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum first began to document all of the camps and ghettos, the belief was that the list would total approximately 7,000. However, researchers have found that the Nazis actually established about 42,500 camps and ghettos between 1933 and 1945. And this figure includes 30,000 slave labor camps, 1,150 ghettos, 980 concentration camps, 1,000 prisoner of war camps, 500 brothels filled with sex slaves. Thousands of other camps and even hospitals were used for euthanizing, murdering, the elderly, the physically and mentally challenged, and others were used for gathering the victims together in order to transport them for extermination in the killing centers. For the survivors, and for those like me who were children of survivors, the figures I just mentioned represent so much more than just numbers. We count and remember among the victims our parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, sons and daughters. And we very much understand the danger of ignorance and hate left unchecked. Now this year, we decided to put together an electronic resource on both the Holocaust and the history of the Indian residential schools. Sure, we saved some trees, which is always a good thing, but more importantly, you all have a resource that you can use to find out more information on these subjects and which link to a lot of other really wonderful online resources. So if you haven't yet had a chance to look at it, please ask your teacher. Now, I wish that I could tell you that we live in a world that is free of hate, of othering, of racism. But today, more than at any other time since the end of the war in 1945, we are witnessing a horrific resurgence of violent anti-Semitism and an explosion of racism, hate, and violence. Jews have been killed in their homes, in their synagogues, while shopping for food. Jews are attacked in the streets of far too many cities for me to name. The diversity of those committing these attacks is stunning. Anti-Semitism is not limited to the explosive growth of white supremacists. And here in Canada, we know that there are at least 100 active hate groups, many of whom express very clear neo-Nazi ideology. And right here, as I'm sure you know, in Manitoba, former Army reservist Patrick Matthews, a white supremacist, was a recruiter for the base, which is one of these violent groups. He's on trial now in the United States, and it is believed that he planned on blowing up trains and poisoning water supplies. Matthews and his friends talked about wanting to hunt people, human beings, and to spark a race war. But please understand, as I said before, there are 100 active hate groups in Canada and another 1,000 in the United States. And people like Patrick Matthews are just very small cogs in a serious machine of hate directed at all those it others, those it views as the enemy. And please understand, too, that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine. Across the globe, and right here in North America, men, women, and children of many different backgrounds are suffering and dying because someone sees them as different, as inferior, as dangerous, or as the enemy. All of us have a responsibility to fight against hate, and you are not powerless. Please stand up against hate. You may feel that your voice does not count, but I assure you that it does. A couple of years ago, an anti-immigration rally that was to take place in Winnipeg was canceled, thanks to a very large and successful counter-rally that took place that day and which began on the street right outside this university. So educate yourselves and join forces with others who are trying to make a difference. And if you're witness to a hate crime, report it and show support for the victim. Promote love and inclusion and stand up against hate and exclusion. Use the power of your voice, because together we can make a difference. Now today, you're going to hear two very powerful stories. This afternoon, you'll hear from Chief Theodore Fontaine, a leader in the Indigenous community who has shared his residential school's experience with audiences near and far, including the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. You'll hear more about Theodore this afternoon, and we are very honored by his participation today. I hope you'll give all of our speakers your full attention, and please remember to turn off those cell phones. You'll also have an opportunity to ask questions of our speakers after this morning's presentation, and again this afternoon. So now it is my honor to introduce you to this morning's keynote speaker, Edith Kimmelman, Holocaust survivor, educator, and school administrator, and I'm honored to say, my dear friend. Edith was born in Rovno, Poland, an adored only child. Her tranquil life came to an abrupt halt in June of 1941 when German troops invaded the small community where she had spent the first 6.5 years of her life. Her nightmarish experiences began shortly after the invasion. She experienced the trauma of watching her home being looted, the complicity and betrayal of neighbors and friends, the shooting death of her father, the murder of her Jewish neighbors, and eventually the death of her mother as a result of a severe beating. All of this has left her, as you can well imagine, with deep and indelible scars, as well as a pronounced fear of the future. Her years in hiding, bereft of family, her only possessions, the clothes she wore, imprinted a fear of poverty and displacement, terrified that she would lose her loved ones. The only treasure that Edith was able to salvage and safeguard was the memory of the unconditional love her family had provided and their reverence for education. Liberated in the spring of 1944, she finally found a safe haven in Canada in June of 1949. And Edith began to pursue higher education as a mature student, obtaining a BA from the University of Winnipeg and teacher certification from the University of Manitoba. She also pursued pre-master's courses at the University of Manitoba, and she studied at summer institutes in Israel, at Bar Ilan and the Hebrew University, in the United States at Columbia University, and in the UK at Oxford. Her focus has been twofold. First, to transmit to students the value of freedom and the consequences of war and hatred. And second, to inspire the resilience of surviving impossible conditions while finding the courage to strive and achieve a better life. Edith is a mother and a grandmother, and her family is with her here today, and she has generously shared her story with students and adults for many, many years. But when you listen to Edith this morning, I want you to remember back when you were in grade 1 and you were 6.5 years old. Just please imagine the 6.5-year-old child that Edith was when her world fell apart. So please join me in welcoming Edith Kimmelman.
Thank you very much, Belle. I'll put it a little bit lower. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here. I see the coronavirus didn't frighten you yet, so I'm glad that we're making it just under the radar. Thank you very much, Belle, for inviting me to speak to the 19th Annual Holocaust and Human Rights Symposium. I'm honored and privileged to address such a large audience. Truly, I'm a bit petrified. I have spoken to many students, but not to such a great number of students. As you have heard, my name is Edith Kimmelman, and I am a child Holocaust survivor. Ever since Belle called me about today's event, I've been agonizing of how to best express, convey clearly to you my thoughts, my feelings, and experiences, given, first of all, that I'm quite an old woman, and secondly, English does not happen to be my native language. It is difficult for me to condense and encapsulate 79 years into a short period of time, and at the same time, succeed to touch upon the most significant events in my life that I would like to share with you. My past had a permanent effect on the whole of my life. I'm reaching a stage, or should I say an age, when remembering what I went to the fridge for, or where I put my keys, has become a mental challenge. Nevertheless, let it not be said today that I didn't try my best. Abba Eban, a Jewish diplomat and most eloquent speaker, said it best in his chapter on the Shoah in his 1984 book, Heritage, and I quote, "The Holocaust marked a general crisis in civilization. At the center of the crisis stood ordeal of the Jews. From the darkest depths of man's divided nature, there sprang at the throat of Jewish people the most violent hatred that had ever convulsed the life and spirit of mankind." He goes on to write, "In the hearts of millions of Jews, there's a sanctuary in which they carry their grief and intimate solitude. Personally, I suffered unforgettable traumas during the Shoah. I shall carry that burden with me for the rest of my life. And yet, in spite of it all, I have not allowed that experience to defeat me. To do that, I would have given victory to Hitler. Instead, I have the victory, and he does not. For I am a survivor, and he did not. The years 1941 to 1949 formed me into a victim and a survivor. A victim, for I'm still reliving today the nightmares of the horrible years of long ago. A survivor, because in the ashes of the Shoah, I was able to find a spark, allowing me to rebuild a new life. My dear students, President Trimby, and everyone here, before I begin to recount my past, I ask only for two things. One, try to visualize in your mind's eye. It's difficult with today's media, but just a little bit try. That before you is not standing an old woman rambling away. I'm not speaking of her. I'm speaking of a 6.5-year-old little girl who lived a very tranquil and happy life. I was a teacher for many years. I'm quite aware of the attention span of students, so I will try not to bore you with what I have to say. Please don't forget to ask questions. To me, they're the most important part of this speaking. I hope that I shall be able to have a satisfying response to your questions. So here before you is my past to the very present. Up to June 1941, I lived in a small, peaceful community in Poland, now Ukraine. Our next-door neighbors were Jewish. I didn't know other Jews. The rest of the neighbors were Ukrainian. My best friend was Lucia, or Lucy in English. I was an only child, as you heard, niece and grandchild. I did not have competition for being loved. I felt the center of everyone's attention. Lucia and I played almost daily in our house. It was a quiet house, it was roomy, and I could always get treats for us from our store. My parents operated a general store. My grandmother lived with us. Our maid Olga was a wonderful, wonderful girl. I remember her till today, and I loved her dearly. The first noticeable change I felt was when everyone seemed to be nervous and anxious. I had no idea why. It's giving me a chance to breathe. Please remember, this was not the time of 24/7 news or Instagrams. All I felt was that something was terribly wrong, but I had no idea what it was. Then one day in June, we heard sounds of loud thunder, but it was cannon fire. The German army was moving toward our community. My dad told us to go into the field and stay there overnight for safety. He stayed behind to look after the house. When we returned in the morning, I could not believe what I saw. People were carrying out all our possessions. When I asked my father why, he shushed me and told me to keep quiet. The children I used to play with would not go near me. They called me Parshiva Żydówka, which in English means a miserable, terrible Jewess. I couldn't understand what was happening. It's difficult for a 6.5-year-old to become world-wise overnight. I didn't know how I changed overnight. What changed with me? It's only yesterday, the day before, the week before, the month before, the year before, that I was very happy with everyone and everyone was happy with me. How could something change so drastically straight overnight? I'm sure that you are all young people, that you've had experiences with your friends, that all of a sudden they were no longer your friends. I'm quite certain that you felt the pain, the disappointment in your relationship falling apart with them. I can't explain to you what I felt, because I didn't only feel that I was ignored or disliked. I felt that something was terribly wrong with me. My best friend Lucia wore my holiday clothes and would avoid me like a plague. When I asked her why, she said her parents told her that the things that I owned now belonged to her, and she could no longer play with me. 79 years later, I can still remember the pain I felt when she ignored me and would not come near me. There was something wrong with me. There must have been something wrong with me because I was Jewish, but I didn't know what was wrong. And so began my journey through the Holocaust. As Belle has told you, life prior to June 1941 was wonderful. It was only a few weeks later, after the German came to our community, that I really realized that I was worried about nothing. Thinking previously that taking away my things, losing all the possessions from our house, losing my friends was a really terrible thing. I was so upset about it. I wept about it. I cried about it. How very foolish I was as a child. The real trauma came just a few weeks later when my father took me to our neighbors to visit, and we saw German soldiers driving up to our house. I saw through the window that they were asking my mother, I had no idea for what, because they were speaking to one another. And my father ordered me to stay at the neighbors while he went to see what was happening. That was the last time that I saw my father alive. I saw that the Germans took him into, they used to have motorcycles with sidecars. They pushed him into one of the sidecars and took him along with them. I did not want to stay with my neighbors and ran to our house and asked my mother what happened. She comforted me and said, "Don't worry, we're going to find him soon. I'll go to the neighbors and ask for their help." My mother and I went from neighbor to neighbor to see if anyone would help us. No one would venture out. One of the neighbors said that they would give us, and this was the time of carts and horses, that they would give us a cart and horse, and that they had heard shooting somewhere nearby. My mother and I went in the cart, and we went to the field in the direction where the shooting was. And we found my father riddled with bullets. I was only 6.5. I didn't want to believe that my father was dead. I grabbed his hand and begged him to wake up, but he wouldn't. My mother had to take my father into the cart as best she could, and we took him home. but we couldn't bury him because the soldiers were moving along the roads. My father was buried in a very shallow grave in the garden. And if it had not been for my two uncles who risked their lives and came and took him and buried him in a Jewish cemetery, that he would have stayed there till today. When you are a child, the first thing you think when someone that you love very much is hurt, what did I do wrong? And that is what I thought. What did I do wrong? Can I do something to bring my father back? But as you know, you cannot bring someone back from death. And that's when I really started to suffer from the Holocaust. Our house was taken over by Ukrainian militia. And my mother was able to overhear, we were left with one bedroom, that they were speaking one day about gathering us all and drowning us in the Horin, which was a river nearby. They also had caught some Russian prisoners of war, and we would have made a very nice group. When my mother overheard it, she said that we must leave immediately because we were going to be killed the next day. My grandmother, who had lived in that community all her life, and I'm quite certain of her ancestors as well, did not believe it. She said, that cannot happen. How would someone that we have known all our lives, that we had been friends with, how would someone dare do something like this? These are our neighbors. These are our friends. This is where I live. I am not going anywhere. My mother was wiser. In the middle of the night, she woke me up and she said that we must live as quietly as we can before morning. We went by the riverside and we started going towards Rovno, which had a community of about 35,000 Jews. It was 24 kilometers away from where I lived. As we walked along the river, we heard someone saying in Ukrainian, "Stop. Where do you think you're going?" We met with two teenagers. And they said, "Where do you think you're going?" Leah, my mother's name was Leah. "Where are you running? Go back to your house." She said, "No, I can't do that. I have to go and ask my brothers to come and help because we were going towards fall. We were going towards harvest time." One of the boys had a rifle. He put the rifle to my mother's mouth and said, "This is your time to leave this world." You know, ladies and gentlemen, young men and women, today, after all these years, in my ears, I can hear myself scream, not with my voice. Think to yourself, think of your mother something like this happening to. What do? You're 6.5 years old. You can't do anything. You're helpless. The second boy was thankfully wiser, and he said, "Leave her alone. What do you need to kill her for and have it on your conscience? Let her go. All the Jews are going to be killed anyway." So they let us go, and we escaped. We walked for 24 kilometers. Through the day, somewhere around I would imagine September, to the town of Rovno. Rovno was a city that my father always dealt with in his business by buying for our store. We had many friends. We stayed with some friends there for a few weeks until one day a man with a wagon, a cart and horse, and a lot of hay in it came to look for us. And he said to my mother, Leah, your parents sent me here from the little community they lived in. They were farmers. I'm going to take you back to their house. It's not every community, not every little village that was affected the same way. It is the people who lived in those communities who affected how the Jews were treated in that place. Some were able to survive longer, others were not. We were unfortunate. My grandparents were more fortunate than I. He hid us in the hay in the cart, and he took us to my grandparents. That was, I think, the first happy time perhaps in my life, because although we were afraid, we knew that we were coming to a safer place. By the way, the city that I'm speaking about, which is Rovno, had 35,000 Jews, as I said. 2 months later, November 19th, in 1941, it was proclaimed by the Germans that anyone who didn't have a work permit was to gather at the train station. 19,000 Jews out of the 35 gathered at that station. The Jews gathered to go to work in camps in Germany. The Jews were taken to a place called Sossinki, where they were gunned down and prepared, dug graves. Had my mother and I not left at the time when we did, we would have been part of those dead Jews, because we didn't have work permits. When we stayed with my grandparents, life was a little bit easier. They had a farm, and we had at least enough food to eat. But it didn't last very long. In the fall of 1942, the ghetto, which was just 7 kilometers away from us in the town near Tuchin, was being liquidated. I don't know if many people know about it, but I think it was one of the first ghettos when someone had the courage to say, we're not going to wait for death. The Jewish people burned down the ghetto, and the community of about 3,500 Jews, I think about 2/3 of them were able to escape. My grandparents were able to escape as well. I didn't mention, because you see my memory wanders around, that during the time that I was with my grandparents and my mother, I had gone to visit my uncle, who lived a little bit far away from us. I didn't want to leave my mother after my father's death. I clung to her because, to me, just having the experience of my father, I knew that if I left her, I would not see her again. My uncles and grandparents were worried about my clinging to her constantly, and I went to visit my uncle just for a short period of time. When I had come back, some Germans with an interpreter had come to look for gold, or whatever my grandparents had. My grandparents were plain farmers. They didn't have gold. They were able to escape by hearing of the Germans coming. I don't know till today for what reason my mother stayed behind. But when I came back from my uncle's, I asked where my mother was, and my grandparents wouldn't let me go to her. Well, I don't have to explain to you what I felt. I was hysterical. I was sure that she was dead, but she wasn't. Instead, I found her in bed, almost beaten to death. In the beating, her kidneys were permanently damaged. She suffered a terrible life until she finally died. And when she did, everything that I loved, everything that I cared for, everything that was dear to me, died with her. I don't think a six or 7 or 8-year-old child really understands the meaning of wanting to die. I mean, we say it, oh, I'm going to die from it. It doesn't mean anything. You don't just die. But when you see that you have nothing to live for, you have no reason to live. If you see that everyone that you cared for is no longer there to love you or to care for you, you're looking for a way out of this world because it loses its meaning for you. And so it did for me. My only good fortune was that, as I said to you before, I had very, very loving parents. I had loving grandparents. I had loving uncles and aunts. And they truly gave me the courage to hang on to life. But above all, a human being does not die easily. You can die only once. You can live and suffer for the rest of your life. We went into hiding in the fall of 1943, and we hid with a wonderful woman named Mrs. Kochanowska, who had 3 sons. She hid us from about September of 1943 to the early spring of 1942 to the spring of 1943. In 1943, in the spring, her sons were teenagers, and we were hiding in a haystack. She used to bring us food when she brought for her horses and cattle slop to eat. And from that, we lived through the first 6 months from 42 to 43. She was quite concerned because her sons were becoming teenagers. They were friendly with other people. And you have to understand, you live in a free country. I hope that you understand what I'm saying. For her to do what she did for us was not only risking her life, she risked the life of her children. And yet she did it. And yet she had the courage to schlep along a pail of potatoes. As an aside, my uncle, who was a sweetheart, said to me, "You know what? I love rotten potatoes. You have the good ones. The rotten potatoes are my favorite." I was stupid enough not to even understand why he did it. In any way, this is the way we lived through the 6 months. Then she came and she said that she's no longer able to hide us, because to hide us meant to risk not only her life, but also her children's. And it was understood not by me, but by my uncles and grandparents who were hiding with me. We left for the forest, and we joined with a group of other Jews who had escaped from the town of Tuchin. They had dug dugouts, underground places in the forest, and we stayed with them through the summer. In the fall of 1943, many Ukrainian citizens, many Ukrainian people of the village where we were near, came to the forest and started looking for the Jews. Remember, the forests were the place where they went for mushrooms, where they went for perhaps for hunting, and they knew them very well. And they said the following: "You cannot stay in the forest. The war is turning. There's going to be victory. We don't want you to be in the forest. We want to save you. We want to show that we have saved your lives. We want you to come out of the forest and to settle for the winter in houses that were vacated by Poles which they had driven out of the houses." They gathered all the Jews that they could find in the forest and settled us into the houses of where the Poles used to live. We were quite afraid, but we had no choice. To stay in the forest when everyone knew where we were made no sense. So, being the optimists, being the believers, we went into the little houses. In January of 1944, we woke up to screaming and knocking on the door. When the door was opened, a man was standing with a bloody sheet over his head. And he said, "Run and save yourselves." The Jewish people that had been collected into the houses were being hacked to death. So we ran. We ran for 7 days. It was January. I was small. For me, the snow was up to literally my neck. And then we could run no longer. We didn't have anything to eat. We didn't have much clothes with us. And we didn't know what else to do. There was nowhere to run. Snow leaves tracks, so we couldn't move around. It was decided, this was January, the Ukrainian Christmas comes about 10 days after the Catholic Christmas, the Christian Christmas, and it was decided that a few young men who were still strong were going to go to the village and find if they can find some food for us, otherwise we would all starve to death. We were waiting for them, and waiting, and waiting, and no one came back. We thought that they were surely dead. And lo and behold, in the evening, the young men came back with pots that are called banyakim, and these are huge earthen pots that were filled with holopchi, with cabbage rolls and meat and food. We hadn't seen food for over a week. We didn't have much food to eat with to begin with. I don't think that I have ever tasted, in the 71 years that I've lived in Canada, food that was that tasty. You have never been to a restaurant with food that was that tasty. You have never tasted your own food that was that delicious. So we ate, and we ate, and we ate, and then we got sick, and sicker, and sicker. But we still were in the forest with nowhere to go and nowhere to hide. It was decided then that instead of staying any longer in the forest, we're going to go to the village and see from there if we can cross a river to the other side. Because when the young men were in the village, they heard that partisans had taken over an area across the river. It was decided that those of us who were left alive I believe there were about between 350, 375 originally who had survived the war till 1944. There were about 75 Jews left. The rest were killed that night. That we were going to go and try to cross the river. The foolish thing that we did is that we went at night. Well, the partisans across the river had no idea who we were. They just saw a large group of people nearing the river. So they started shooting. When they shot, we ran. And we went back to the village. The next day, the villagers began to return home because they had gone away. They were afraid of the partisans. We were hoping to meet them. The next day it was decided that we can't do it at night. We're going to do it during the daytime. And in the daytime, we gathered and we went down the road towards the river. It was either we were going to survive and live, or we're going to be surrounded and be killed. As we were walking down the road, we saw soldiers approaching on horses. They were too far away. We were so frightened. We were certain that those were Germans or they were militia. And lo and behold, when the first person neared on a horse, he had a red star on his hat. A red star on his hat meant that he was a Russian soldier. He got off the horse and looked at us. I can see him today, and he wept. And we cried with him. We couldn't believe our good fortune that we finally met someone who may rescue us and not try to kill us instead. They took us across the river, and we stayed in a village for several weeks until the army, the Russian army, passed through and liberated the area from the German army. We stayed there for a few weeks, and you have to remember that the time that I'm talking to you about, and it reminds me about what we have now, and if just think of it for a moment, what is happening with the coronavirus? What are the people doing? They're isolating whole provinces, they're isolating whole towns, flights. Everything is being isolated, and the reason for it is to keep the other people from infecting themselves with the virus. Well, we were isolated from literally 1942 until the spring of 1944. So when we came to a little town called Mezherich, we promptly all got sick with typhus. My grandfather, I thought he was old. He most likely was in the 50s or perhaps early 60s at the time, died from typhus. My mother didn't survive. I did. I was lying beside a woman, and it makes me laugh today when I think our fevers were so high, she thought she was an opera singer, so I had opera arias right through my typhus ordeal. And we came out from typhus to nothing. We had no money. We had no food. Now, I don't know, you are fortunate people. You have homes, you have parents, you have people who care for you. We live in a country that cares. We have social services, we have social welfare, we have someone to turn to. We had nothing. The people who lived in the homes that were taken over from the Jews who had died were not that excited to see us back. They thought that we came to take back things. All we really wanted was to eat. Now, I have to tell you that I have not the slightest idea how we started. I think my uncle must have stolen something on the market, because somehow we had some food to eat. The Russian soldiers had a kitchen, and they used to give us whey, which they had from the cheese. They didn't have very much food themselves. The front was still going on. This was 1944, not 45. We struggled through recovering from typhus, but the hunger was overbearing. The incident that will never leave me, ever in my life, was when the family decided that as the youngest child, I was the best candidate to go about and beg for food. I hope that no one here today ever lives through that experience. I cannot think of a most demeaning, shameful thing to do than walk around with a bag in your hand, knock on the door, and say, "Can you spare a piece of bread for me? I don't have what to eat." Some people were kind. Some people didn't have what to eat themselves. And some people said, "Get away from here before I sick a dog on you." I can live through those feelings now. Today, in my 80s, I have nightmares that I will not have enough to eat. As you can see, I'm well endowed with weight. My fridge is bursting with food. I have no problems of having overstocked fridges and freezers. And yet, I'm always afraid that I'll be back in the position of begging. I'm looking, I don't want to take too much of your time away. I want to leave time for questions. And that was the period of my time from 41 to almost 45. When the war ended, as Polish citizens, we were able to immigrate from the Ukraine, which at that time still belonged to Poland, to deeper Poland, to the city of Lodz, which anyone who wants to look up on Google will know about this famous ghetto and all the experience of the Jews in it. We moved from there to Lodz, and this was the first time that I was able to go to a so-called school. We stayed there for a while, but things were not very peaceful, and we were very, very afraid. So we moved from Lodz to a place in the Lower Silesia called Waldenburg, and there for the first time I went to school. This was in almost 1946, 1945, 46. Well, when they war was ended, I was already 9 years old. It was 1944. 1945, I was already 10. But my parents always emphasized with me, even as a small child, that education was first and foremost. I can very well remember that every time that I got sick, the bed was always filled with books and pictures. I could not read at the time, and my parents would read to me. My grandmother almost nightly read to me and told me Torah's books, which I loved to hear. My grandfather, when I visited there, always told me stories. I was a pest. I used to ask why. And my grandfather used to say to me, you know, Edith, with you, it's better not to begin because you never ask why. I do it till today. I've given you a brief overview of what happened to me during the years of the Holocaust. I can't give you details of every day of my life. This is not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that when something like this happens, people change. There becomes a mob mentality, a group mentality. And this is why today, when I stand here and I listen to what Belle said, and I'm quite aware of the anti-Semitism and everything that is happening, I am not comfortable. I'm quite frightened, and I feel quite unsafe. I came to Winnipeg in 1949, in June of 1949. I didn't have a formal education, but I wanted one desperately. We came with very little money. We rented the house, my uncle, my grandmother, and I. And we lived in the house, and I went to work in a sweater factory. I was 14. I said I was 16. No one asked me for documents, and I worked in the factory from 49 until 54. I always studied. I'm proud of myself that I went to St. John's Night School twice a week, straight from work. And by the way, my wages when I started were a whole 50 cents an hour. Can you believe it? I brought home $20 a week. I was thrilled. I went to Eaton's basement, bought myself a winter coat, and froze through the winter because it was really a spring coat. I used to go to the store when I came here, put out my hand with the money to pay for the groceries because I didn't know how to speak English. And anyone here who is a new immigrant, who has parents who have difficulty with the language, knows exactly what I'm saying. It was a very embarrassing time. Thank God that we had really honest grocers. I wanted very much to be something. I felt that surviving, even though without my parents, that they left me with a gift. They left someone after them. They left someone to grow back. How many of you remember last October's storm? Anyone? Boy, your memories are very poor. Come on now. Last October's storm, when the trees were uprooted, where the branches were on the ground. Wake up, boys and girls. Okay, that's much better. So when when you looked out, thank you, you can put your hands down. When you looked up at the storm, what did you see? You saw branches broken off. You saw trees uprooted. You saw houses that were damaged. And you said to yourself, too bad, what a lot of work. Too bad, I won't be able to go where I wanted to. I didn't see that. I saw, when I looked outside from the 12th floor, the tree as my parents, the trunks that were torn away from their roots. I saw myself as a branch torn away, but I also saw myself as a branch that is not going to die and go to the compost heap. I saw myself as a branch that has to take root and grow. So I grew. I got married at 19, was married for 63 happy years. I grew branches. I grew 3 beautiful sons. I have 2 wonderful grandsons who call me Hip Baba. I used to think that it was because of my replaced hip surgery. They say, no, Baba, you're just a hip Baba. And I was able to achieve what I most wanted. It is thanks to the University of Winnipeg's policy in the early years when I was here, that students were accepted as normal students on their merit rather than on a diploma. I didn't have a diploma. I didn't have any papers. I didn't have anything. But on my merit, hooray, hooray, in 2 courses, I was able to get my 6 points, and I became a mature adult student. I was able to get my degree at university here. I was able to go on for my 4th year at the University of Manitoba and to almost complete my pre-master's degree. I taught school for almost 30 years. I taught Hebrew because to me, education, I think, is first and foremost. I think if people had not been as illiterate, perhaps they would be better. But I'm not right about that. Germany was a very literate society, and yet they did what they did. People who were our friends, our neighbors, did what they did. But education is at least a tool that we can use. Bernie Farber, former head of Canadian Jewish News, recently wrote the following: Jews are no strangers to anti-Semitism. While history has shown us that Jew hatred will take an occasional holiday, it never takes a permanent vacation. I'm frightened by the current rise in anti-Semitism. I'm reaching a time of my life when every day is a bonus. The world I live in is turbulent. So very many countries are at war with others or within themselves. I'm grateful that I live in Canada and express my feelings before you without feeling repercussions just because I happen to be a Jew. I hope I have been able to leave with you some seeds of thought that will take root. Jewish people love analogies and they love parables. So I'm going to leave you with just a few. One tells about a Jewish shepherd in Israel who was totally illiterate and wanted very much to have an education. He was herding the sheep to a spring to water them, when he saw a drip of water making a huge hole in the rock, and he said to himself, if one little drop of water can make such a huge dent in the rock, I can learn too. He became the famous Rabbi Akiva with 40,000 followers. The second parable is about a young man who walks on the street and sees an old man planting a tree, and he says to him, "What are you doing, old man? You're planting a tree, you will never see the fruit of it." And the old man said, "My son, I know that very well. I'm not planting for myself. I'm planting for the future generations so they can enjoy the fruits of my planting." To you young, wonderful people, what can I say? If you can make an effort, if you can persevere in the future, and if I have been successful just to plant a little seed for you, just to make you aware of what can happen to normal, good, caring people, how they can turn around in times of mass hysteria, of mass hatred, that for some reason is always somewhere around, sometimes hidden and sometimes overt. But if people can become such people that they can kill so many, and the war has not only taken our 6 million Jews, World War II is estimated at having killed between 60 and 80 million people. If people can do that to one another, if people can do that today by killing indiscriminately their neighbors, their brothers, their friends, just because of ideologies, just because they don't happen to like their color, just because they don't happen to like their skin, just because they don't happen to like them. I am always afraid that history can repeat itself. But for one thing, for you, it is not I who can make the changes in the world. I'm too old. I'm actually on my way out. You are on the way in. You can do it. You really can. Think to yourself, you can really accomplish a lot. But not if you don't try, not if you don't want to understand, not if you don't want to feel for another people's feelings, not if you don't care for others, and not if you don't care for justice. As a final thing, I will quote Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, and he's called Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. He's my favorite author. His name, by the way, is S-A-C-K-S. We cannot end evil and suffering, but we can diminish it. We cannot eliminate injustice, but we can fight it. We cannot abolish sickness, but we can treat it and search for a cure. I cannot change yesterday, but I can change tomorrow by what I can do today. I cannot change yesterday. I've tried from yesterday till today to change you so that you can change tomorrow. You are my future. You are my hope. Please don't let me go away from this stage by disappointing me. I have never been disappointed in my students. Don't disappoint me today. Go home, take a moment, and think for a better future for yourselves, and as you grow up, for your children, and as you grow up, for your country. Canada has given me life. It has given me freedom. It has given me an education. It has given me the opportunity to raise my children without looking out for someone calling me dirty Jew, for someone saying your children cannot go to school because they're Jewish, for someone who's going to say to me, you cannot have your children achieve what you want for them because they're Jewish. Jew doesn't mean in Canada to me anything except that I'm a human being as you all are, that I will have the privilege when I am done wrong, that I have to turn to someone and go and say to them, someone did something wrong for me, and that the mayor or the police or the government will stand up and they will say, no, we will not have a repeat performance to the Jewish people as it was done before. It cannot be done through anything else but your conscience and your mind. As I told you before, there were Ukrainians, there were people, there were collaborators who killed, who robbed, who plundered, who ignored, who hated, and treated me not as a person, but like in the extermination camp, as a number. I was nothing because a Jew meant nothing. In Canada, I'm a human being. I'm proud, so proud of my 3 sons. My husband and I were able to give them a good education on their own. They achieved professional status, which I'm very proud of. I'm not going to tell you what they are. Remember, I'm a Jewish mother, so you know what they wish for. And I have 2 adorable grandsons. I wish on you no worse relationship than I have with them. They care for me. I love them and will to the end of my life. Thank you for being such wonderful listeners. Thank you. Now you're going to make me cry, and I tried not to do that.
Raise your hand.
My son, my grandson.
Now I get a hug.
We're still hugging.
Yeah, it's still safe. We have the question and answer now?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Edith, I want to thank you. I have heard you speak more than once, and I know your story so well, and yet every time I hear you, I'm changed. And I never will forget your story or all of the wisdom that you shared with so many students throughout the years, and I know just how painful it is for you. And I know that each one of you here is changed. I know that you will always remember this experience as you go throughout life, and you will be inspired in the same way that I continue to be inspired by Edith. So now you have an amazing opportunity to ask questions. You can see that in the aisle on this side and on that side, there's a microphone. And if you could line up behind the microphone, you can take turns asking questions. I know that it's always tough to be the first person to ask the question, but I'm sure that you have so many things that you want to find out more about. So I invite you to come down now and ask your questions of Edith. And please remember to speak right into the microphone in a nice loud voice so that we can hear you.
No, it's because I'm hard of hearing.
Is it? Oh, okay. You were.
First of all, thank you for being the first one. The first is the most difficult.
You were talking about how you can never really truly get rid of evil in the world, but you can diminish it and try to fight it. So I was wondering, for you, what do you think would be the best course of action, like besides just raising awareness, like events like this, to defeat anti-Semitism, at least in Canada?
As I have quoted to you, that it tends to take vacations but doesn't want to die. So what do? If something is lifelong and doesn't die, the only thing that you can do is make sure, like a very terrible disease that you know you're not going to get out of, but you use medication. You go to doctors, you speak to people who know better, and you try to look for something to keep it in check. I don't think that we can eradicate anti-Semitism like we cannot eradicate wars. Look at Syria, look at the Middle East, look at Africa. But we can do something. It's our not doing that causes what happened in the Holocaust and what is happening in the world today. Is being proactive. It's saying to yourself, it's okay, I can be just a little drip, but many drips make a dent. So don't be worried about being a drip. You'll be a very important one, believe me.
I was wondering, how did your family decide to move to Winnipeg specifically? Or was it just random?
No, thank you. That's a very good question. My great-uncles, my mother's uncles, were foresters, and they came to Manitoba, to Beausejour, to, what is the other one? In that area as foresters, as immigrants in the 20s. When the war ended, they approached the Red Cross to see if any survivors were left of the family. As a matter of fact, my family, my personal family, my father and mother, had papers to come to Canada before the war, but my paternal grandmother said to my father, you have such a wonderful business here, you're going to go to a new country, you're going to be a new immigrant, you don't know the language, here you have everyone that you know, we are among our own people, let's stay here. It was a terrible mistake that cost my parents' lives. But anyway, they did get in touch with us, and it is because of them and they're sending papers that allowed us on a visa to come to Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I was wondering what would be your advice to youth that undergo severe trauma? What would you advise them to do to better themselves and better the situation around them?
How would you advise youth who suffered severe trauma to better their own situation and that around them?
I think that unfortunately, and I'm speaking of myself personally, I can't speak for every survivor, because you have to remember that every survivor was a different person in a different situation and responded to it in all likelihood, given their background, their environment, their upbringing, and so on. So I'm speaking for myself. The only way that I'm able to keep trauma in check is to say that I will not let it destroy my life. There are many Holocaust survivors who are in institutions and mental institutions. There are many Holocaust survivors who till today cannot stand and speak about it. You deal with trauma as best you can, and thankfully here you seek help and hope that you come to the right professional who can really help you along with it.
Thank you.
Considering all the terrible things people have done to you, I wonder, do you hold a grudge against anyone, be it the German army or the villagers that, like, you know, wronged you?
If I would really have a real grudge, I'd be dead now. I could not survive with the hatred that the people who perpetrated the crimes on me did. I couldn't live with that. But I cannot forget what I have to forgive in order to be able to survive and stay mentally alert. I can't forget what happened, but I cannot live hating everyone. That's number one. Number two, I have no hatred for anyone but the ones who really did it. That would be like you would hate a friend for what 10 other people did to you. You can't forget the pain that someone inflicts on you, but you try to live with it as best you can and be at peace so you can survive.
Thank you.
First things first, I want to thank you for telling us about this speech. It's very touching to me personally, and I think I can speak for all the students here that it was quite touching. But the question I have for you is, how did you manage to maintain your faith while believe in yourself or even in your religion, or how could you fight?
That's a wonderful question. When the war ended, I told you I really wanted to die. I didn't really feel that I had anything to live for. I think I'm not the only one. Many Jews had to make that decision. Some Jews chose to say there was no God. How could God possibly allow something like this to happen? Remember, God is a concept. God is not holding a gun to your head. People are. I had to make a decision in my personal life, instead of not believing, to say, no, I don't want to live through life not to believe, because to live without any faith at all is a very, very difficult thing. You have to have faith in something. Even if you are a non-believer, you're believing that you're a non-believer. So you see, you're already believing in something. I chose to say that I'm here for a purpose. My parents wanted me to go to university. They spoke about it when I was 5 years old. It never left my thoughts, so I went to university. I couldn't give them a gift that they should sit in 1980 and see me graduate, but I could give a gift to myself to say, here, parents, is something that I'm giving you that I could not have achieved if I would not choose this path. So I'm religious, I'm traditional, I keep a kosher home, I have faith, because without faith, I would be dead.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Sorry.
First, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And my question is, when was the first time that you felt really, truly free after the war, after you came back from the war?
In June 1949, when I was sitting in the train in Halifax on my way to Winnipeg. That was the time when I felt truly free. And that's when I felt, for the first time, that I'm not going to be in the DP camp, that no one is going to run after me, that I can be a human being again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Your speech, it really compelled me, and it made me realize the problem of anti-Semitism. So how can like an average high schooler like me do something about it?
You're wonderful. See, I told you I'm trying to seed. So here's my little seed right there. Can you see him growing? There before you, you have the little plant that I've planted today. I hope you grow into a wonderful tree, have many branches, and give fruit to many people of your efforts. Thank you.
Hi, I'm wondering if your family had not much resources to get warm clothes or food back in the war, how did you get to Winnipeg?
I can tell you what I had a lot of after the war, and those were lice. Those I had tons of after the war. I don't know if you can understand that I wore the same clothes from 1942 until 1944. My closets are bursting. I don't know what to do with my clothes now. It wasn't a problem. I never had a cold. I get a cold every time I go outside. Your body is an amazing system. It survives the unsurvivable. And you begin with nothing. I told you I came here. I had a choice. I would have loved to go to school. We didn't have enough money for rent, so I went to work, and that's how we started.
Thank you.
I can't imagine that this is easy to talk about or relive. So, and I know you've given this speech before. Does it get easier to give each time?
I said to Belle, this is the last hurrah. I do not think that I'll be able to do that again. I don't know if I can convey to you, because you're not me, I am I. From the day that Belle phoned me and asked me to speak, I swear to you, honestly, Torah, I could not stop thinking and reliving, and especially saying, how can I get not only to the hearts of the, because I'm speaking from the heart, I'm not speaking from a script. How can I get to the minds of the students? How can I make them understand that what I'm willing to do today, can they really understand a 6.5-year-old speaking when they see an old woman before them? We are in a country, we are in a life, we're in a system where everything is visual, and we've been trained to, I'm sure you spend quite some time on your computer and in your app and whatever you have electronically. Sometimes we forget to think. I can't stop thinking. I can't stop reliving. So coming here today, to me, was a choice of saying, sorry, Belle, I cannot do it again. It's just too much for my age. I'll go home. I'm quite certain that I'll have nightmares. But what choice do I have? The choice I have is not to do anything and not to say anything. I don't want you to make those choices. I want you to make positive choices and proactive ones, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to ask how long it took you to adapt living here in Winnipeg. Sorry, to what? I just wanted to ask how long it took you to adapt living here in Winnipeg.
Don't ask me questions like that, please. if you come, perhaps from a country where you know one language, it's okay, so you know one and you learn another one. Although I was only 14 when I came. When I came here, I spoke 7 languages. I speak Ukrainian quite fluently, Polish, German, Yiddish, Hebrew, English, so-so, and I couldn't speak a word of English. I could say yes, no. Hopefully I said yes and no at the right times, but I could say that, and very little else. It is very difficult. I'm giving advice to anyone who is new and comes here. First thing you do, run to a night school, run to a school. I'll tell you what I did. I was reading the comic strips because I couldn't understand what it said, but I could see what it said. And from the comic strips, from the little balloons of talking to one another, that's how I learned my first English language.
Hi. My question is, how has it affected your mental health overall, like throughout your lifetime and around the people around you?
What mental health? I'm a basket case. I only pretend to be normal. I don't think that it's possible for a Holocaust survivor, and in my case, particularly at such a young age, I think that the younger you are, the imprint and the trauma stays with you and has a stronger impact. Also, I told you about the environment. I don't know. Perhaps if I would have been a street urchin or had a family of 6 or 7 brothers and sisters, had someone to fight with. I was an only child, an only grandchild. I don't think I could walk till I was 3 years old because I was carried around all the time. My mental state is unstable, but it's under control because that is the only way that we can survive, by controlling things that are beyond our control sometimes. I'm not mentally stable because I cannot stop thinking of the past. I cannot stop thinking, what could I have been? Could I have had brothers? Could I have had sisters? Where was the love of my parents? Those things stay with me forever. I have the children's celebration, or I celebrate something for my grandchildren. I say how wonderful my parents would have felt about it, how my grandparents would have enjoyed it. That's not a reality. That's even an irrationality. I'm an old person. They wouldn't have been here anyway. But I can't stop missing them because I lost them too young.
Thank you.
Hi. So when you lost your parents, did you ever cope with your loss, or how did you do it?
The death of a person is a permanent condition. The choice that you have is, like I said before, is either to fall victim or to cope and be a victor. If you become a victim, then you mourn for the rest of your life. If you want to be a victor, then you say, I know what happened, I hurt, I'm in pain, but I will not allow it to destroy my life and that of my children or my grandchildren.
Thank you.
You are wonderful, wonderful kids. I'm so glad that you listened. I was just worried that I'll bore you to death. Thank you.
what do you do to ease like the memory of like the past?
I try not to think of it. No, seriously. I think it depends on what the past is, because we're human beings and we have memories. And thankfully, at my age, I can still remember most things. Like I told you, short-term memory is over there, but the long-term memory stays. And you learn. There are people who have disabilities, people that are blind, there are people that have broken arms, broken legs, broken bodies, broken memories, broken consciences. They live to cope with it as best they can. I have learned to live and cope with what I have to the best of my ability, not always succeeding, but most of the time.
Thank you.
Hello. First of all, I want to say thank you so much. I'm definitely going to take a lot from this conversation. And my question is, what steps did you take in order to learn to trust people and respect friendships again after your closest friends that you thought, right, betrayed you?
In 1912, I went back to the Ukraine. 2012, I went to the Ukraine to see if I could find my father's grave. Unfortunately, when I went there, all I found was a pasture, and I couldn't even find a marker where he was buried. I asked in the village if the girl, Lucia, that I was telling you about, is still alive, and if they knew where she lived. The villagers told me, yes, she lives over there, and she's married to so-and-so, and I went to see her. And she said, is that you? Oh my God, I can't believe it. Wait till I go into the other room. I'm going to put on a special dress for you. And she put out an elaborate table. And I thought to myself, Lucia, darling, do you believe? Do you remember what happened? How could you forget? I couldn't. At the same time, I said, she accepted me and she received me with love. It wouldn't be fair not to return it, regardless of what I remembered.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much again. I really think it's so important that you're here and educating us all. I was just wondering, when was the first time that you decided to speak out about your experiences? And since I know it's hard, how did you find that strength to continue to do so?
You are such great askers. I think that what happened in my case was when I started teaching at school, because of the experiences that I had, and because I cannot distance myself completely, it was very seldom that something from my past didn't creep into what we were speaking. And I also found that when I was teaching, that the material that I was teaching, I taught Hebrew, was not as important to the students as the feelings about what I was teaching was. I could share with them the feelings of, I don't know, Abraham or any people from the Bible, and I could say, what do you think he felt like? But while I was talking about Abraham, I thought of how did I feel when someone didn't believe me? And I think that gave me the motive to speak out a little bit more as time went by. I'm normally quite a shy person, and I'm telling you, I'm absolutely petrified to stand here, even though I pretend that I'm not, I am. But it gave me the courage to speak out. But it took a very long time until I could separate myself to what happened and be able to stand in front of an audience without breaking down. It's a very difficult job to do, but I try.
Thank you.
I understand that revisiting places where you have bad memories from can be traumatic and difficult. But I remember I heard you say that you tried going back to Ukraine and finding your father's grave. So do you still, like, every now and then think about revisiting your neighborhood or your village or the place where you came from, or even like just seeing how things are different now than they were before?
Well, I think it's very ironic that I come from a country which many have shown so much hatred against Jews, to have a Jewish president and prime minister at this point in time. But at the same time, I don't quite know how to explain to you. Home is the place where you were born. I was born in the Ukraine. That's a fact of life. That's where I spent 6.5 of the happiest years of my life. I can't separate from that. While I remember what happened after, those memories are very precious to me. And although I'm in Canada for, I told you it's going to be 71 years, I'm a Canadian citizen, but I was born in the Ukraine.
Hi, so I was just, thank you. I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story today. And I was just wondering if it was easy to connect to a Jewish community when you first came to Canada.
That's a very political question. I don't think I can answer it at this point. The only thing I would say is that when I came to Canada, because I was a survivor and sort of, what do they say, birds of a feather flock together, so I was searching more for survivors like myself and went to not necessarily clubs, but to places where I knew I would meet other survivors, and I am very close friends. That is not to say that I don't have any friends who are Canadian born. I'm very close to many people, but my first instinct was to find my own, as I'm sure people who come from other countries feel that way when they begin their life in a new country.
Thank you.
Hi, so a lot of how we relive history and learn about historical events, I feel, is through various forms of art. So do you believe that certain films and other forms of art really do justice to the events that happened all these years ago?
You're asking the wrong person the wrong question. I can draw a line. I can admire art. I think that any form that can express, whether it is art, whether it is film, whether it is any other media, when it can express honestly events, it's worthwhile to watch and worthwhile to preserve.
Hello. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. Being an immigrant myself, it really hit close to home, and so I want to thank you a lot for that. And also, you mentioned that you have 3 kids and you also have grandchildren. I just wanted to know how your life experiences affected the way that you raised your children and the type of values that you taught them.
I think that the good values that I taught them is to be appreciative of where they were, that they were in a free country, that they had the freedom to achieve. I always used to say to my grandson, "Darling, the sky is the limit." And he would say to me, "But Baba, the sky is limitless." And I would say to him, "That's exactly what I'm saying to you. Reach for the sky, darling." So reach for the sky and don't be afraid.
Thank you.
First of all, I would just like to say thank you for sharing your story. I'm sure I don't speak just for myself when I say that your bravery is extremely admirable. And I'd like to ask you, do you think enduring these horrible tragedies as a child changed your perception of them at all? And do you think if you had gone through the same things a little bit older, you would have dealt with them differently?
How will I ever know? That's why I say that I can speak for not only that I speak for myself, but because we're all so different and because we respond and react so differently, I'm sure that there are many Jewish people who don't want to be here, who don't want to be in front of an audience, who don't want to remember, who cannot deal or cope with it. I have chosen this path. And I'm happy that I did. And I'm most happy that you're all here and listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, thanks a lot for sharing your experience. And my question is that, do you have any regrets when you think about all of that?
It's a wonderful question, but it's difficult to answer. I think that the regret that I have is that I wasn't 10 years older. Perhaps the impact would have not have been as strong. I have regrets that I don't have brothers and sisters because I had carried the burden all by myself and I didn't have someone to share it or someone's shoulders to cry upon. I regret that people who are supposed to be human beings can turn overnight into your enemy. I don't know how I would react. I was never put in that situation. I don't think I could do it.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I'll just say that I could relate some of the things that you said. Learning a new language was really hard.
You don't mind my English?
It's amazing.
It ain't so good.
It took me a while too, and I understand what you kind of went through. But my question here is, did teaching help forget a little bit of things, like ease it down on maybe, like the students, you know?
You may not believe it, and if there are teachers here, you know what I'm saying. You can't love every student that you have in your classroom. Some are, I won't say complicated. Some are special, and some are very special, and some are not so special. But you do the best you can with what you have.
Thank you.
First of all, I would like to start off with saying thank you very much for being here and speaking about your experiences. One question that I would like to ask is, how can the media play a role in raising awareness in regards to anti-Semitism?
I have a problem with the media, and I'll explain to you why. I find that anything that is new is talked about to ad nauseum. I mean, if I hear one more time how many people died of coronavirus or how many people are infected, I get very, very nervous about numbers because I feel that with numbers, people forget that there are human beings behind the numbers, and that bothers me greatly. So I would like the media, when they speak, to speak honestly and not to hit over the head people, but to call people, to call experts, to call sane people, to speak rationally about the things, but not only to speak. Speaking about something is just talk. I'm moving my lips. Doing about something that you're not happy with is the first path to success. And I wish you yours.
Thank you.
First off, I'd like to say thank you for being here, and I hope that we all take something away from this. And my question is, would you say that due to the severity of the trauma you experienced when you were young, that your perception of how bad something may be now or how bad a situation is has been altered?
I don't want to tell you to what degree. When my children were young, when the boys were young, if they didn't come home in a certain hour, I never thought that they stayed out too late or they forgot to call back. I always was certain that they were hit by a car, they were run over, somebody, I don't know, mugged them or killed them or did something. I never had a positive thought because of the experiences that I had of what happened and of the helplessness that I felt of not being able to do anything at a young age or even at an older age of what was happening to you. And I'm quite certain as students yourself, you find yourself in a situation where you feel caught and not able to do something. But I'm telling you, have courage. Better times will come along.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, again, thank you so much for coming because I think it's just so important that we hear a first-hand experience instead of read it in the books or read it online. My question is, when you came to Canada, did you experience any form of anti-Semitism that you would have experienced back where you were born? And if so, would you say that the love you received from your community would have outweighed that hate, or was there no love at all?
I don't think that I was seeking love from the community. I think that what I was seeking was companionship, friendship, and above all, understanding. I think that if you do not go through the trauma yourself, we sometimes expect from others to understand our feelings. No one can live for you your life. So I had to be careful, even when I speak to you, not to say, oh, they have to understand every word that I say. They have to feel. You cannot feel for me. But at the same time, I have to say that I have never felt in Canada that there was something negative about me just because I was Jewish. I may have been too fat or too thin or too well-dressed or not dressed well enough, but I never felt a feeling, an emotional feeling that someone was against me. So I'm very blessed to be here.
Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, thank you very much for coming. You really touched my heart today.
You're touching mine.
Thank you. And I wanted to know if your connection to God changed after the Holocaust.
As I said before, I had to make a choice. The choice for me was, if I believe in a concrete God, like that he's sitting and coming down and he's going to do something, when I sat beside my father, I said, God, please help him to get up. But I was 6.5 years old. I couldn't quite grasp the concept of someone being dead. As I grew older, I had to make a choice. And the choice was not so much a belief in God, but having faith in God. And that is what's helping me, is helping me, and will help me to the end of my days. And that is to have faith, because without faith, it's very difficult to live if you lose faith in everyone and in everything. So I'm keeping the faith, baby.
Thank you.
First off, I want to thank you for coming out here and talking. Event that caused you trauma, I can understand how hard that must be. But the question I have is, do you think or hope that your grandchildren will pass on your story through the generations?
I think that my grandson sitting here today, taking off time from university, has come here for a purpose. I haven't spoken to him yet what the purpose was, whether it was to support me or not. And I do remember you from Eitz Chaim. We sit almost on the same bench together. I think that they have now, that they have research which says that the genetic transmission of your fears and of your anxieties and of your experiences are carried over into your children and grandchildren and maybe future generations. I hope that only the positive things will remain with them and the negative things will dissolve with time.
Before we break for lunch, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for the extraordinary questions that you asked today, which I think in all of the years that I've been involved with the symposium were the most wonderful questions and most insightful ever. And I want to thank your teachers and your parents, because without them, I mean, this wonderful insight doesn't come from a void. So thank you. We have time for lunch now. So ask you to come back here and be in your seats, please, by 12:45 for our afternoon speaker. And thank you again. And so at this time, I'd like to call on the March of the Living participants to present a brief ceremony in memory of the victims of the Nazis and their collaborators. The March of the Living is an annual international educational program that brings some 10,000 young people and survivors from all around the world to Poland to study the history of the Holocaust and to examine the roots of prejudice, intolerance, and hatred. And then the trip continues to Israel. But sadly, due to the coronavirus epidemic, this year's March of the Living has been put on hold, and that is the very first time that this has happened since its inception in 1988. And more than 50 survivors had been expected to travel with the marchers, some of them who were pushing themselves very hard to attend despite health concerns because of the 75th anniversary.
We light the first candle in memory of our fellow Jews who have perished in many places at the hands of the Nazis in the most cruel and inhumane ways, some of starvation, some of tortures, and so many by poisonous gas, but all with Shema Yisrael on their lips.
We light the second candle in sacred memory of our brothers and sisters who died al Kiddush Hashem in Auschwitz, Dachau, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Babi Yar.
We light this third candle in memory of the 1.5 million pure and innocent Jewish children who perished during the Holocaust.
We light this fourth candle in memory of our brothers and sisters who, as partisans and underground fighters against the Nazis, defended Jewish honor and dignity.
We light this fifth candle in memory of the heroic fighters in the Warsaw Ghetto, who in their darkest hour broke the chains of slavery and freed themselves to fight the Nazi savages, and when they died, they did so free and with dignity.
The sixth candle becomes a symbol of life. The Jewish response to death has always been an affirmation of life. Our people's death would all be together in vain if we did not choose life. Choose our future, choose tomorrow. The depth of our choice can only be fathomed in the light of memory.
We light this seventh candle as the candle of hope. We hope its flame will take us from the darkness of the past and illuminate the future, that its beacon will serve as a reminder to us, to all of humanity, to the depths to which we can sink. Let us all remember to keep the flame burning and to not let the light go.
Before I introduce you to Theodore Fontaine, I would like to make a traditional tobacco offering. Tobacco is extremely important in the indigenous cultures of the prairies, and it's one of the sacred medicines. We offer tobacco to elders when asking them to share their knowledge and wisdom with us, and the exchange of tobacco is similar to a contract between two parties. The elder is agreeing to do what I ask, and the person offering the tobacco has obligations to respect the teachings and the teachers. And so I ask you to share your wisdom with us this afternoon, and we will be listening very, very carefully. And so it's now my pleasure to introduce Chief Theodore Fontaine. And I want to start off by saying how grateful we are for him coming here today, because he was not feeling well earlier in the week. And out of an abundance of concern for all of you, we had him seated on the stage this afternoon and away from you. I know that at the end of the day, you're going to all want to gather and hug him, but unfortunately that won't be possible. And of course, I think that as the days go on, we're going to have to put off hugging people for quite some time. Chief Theodore Fontaine is a member of the Saging Ojibwe First Nation in Manitoba. He attended the Fort Alexander and Assiniboia Indian residential schools from 1948 to 1960. Theodore graduated in civil engineering from the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology in 1973 and went on to work extensively in the corporate, government, and First Nations sectors, including 11 years with the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs as executive director, a lead on Indian residential schools, and as a negotiator of national employment equity claims. He has served in leadership and voluntary roles with organizations such as the Banff Centre for Management, Peace Hills Trust, the Indigenous Leadership Development Institute, the Manitoba Museum, the Victorian Order of Nurses, and Palliative Care Manitoba. He is a regular speaker and media commentator on Indian residential schools, and he has presented his national bestseller, Broken Circle, The Dark Legacy of Indian Residential Schools, a memoir, to more than 1,000 audiences in Canada and the United States. He continues to break new ground by supporting residential school survivors and by seeking reconciliation directly with those who were the perpetrators of his abuse. Theodore also welcomes new Canadians and families at Canadian citizenship ceremonies, and he has shared his residential schools experience at events at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Theodore's wife, Morgan, is accompanying him today. Please join me in giving them both a very warm welcome. And just one quick reminder, you will have an opportunity for question and answer afterwards, as you did this morning. If your school, for whatever reason, needs to leave before we're done, please leave very, very quietly. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. First of all, I want to thank Belle and her committee for asking me to come in and join you this afternoon. I really wanted to come to this function and greet all our young people, our future leaders of not only Winnipeg, but Canada. So thank you for having me here. I also want to thank her committee for having agreed to have me here to not to talk particularly on the Holocaust, but to talk about, comparatively speaking, on what happened to us in Canada. First of all, I especially want to thank Edith for having the courage and fortitude to speak about her own personal experience in that major world event that we experienced in the 40s and 30s. But first, I want to ask you to bear with me. I'm going to speak with you in one of Canada's first languages. And I want to say a couple words in my language. I will do a little overview of what I've asked in my prayer. So, Shemanitu, Wichi, Kino Magapita Tapiot, Kani Ganshkam Wat, Ane Wat, Miumaga Yang, Abichi, Nongum Ganop Mak, Kanika Anish, Gusto Sin to eat a bimago, Miagoga Niganshkam Wat, Goguchi Mak, Gokum, Shunamishum, Chipi Minatapiatama, Chipi Wichi Young, Chimino Te Young, Kapsko, Oeti Basic Nimishom, Misniju de Gaginit. No de Nandamak, Wachipi shot, Kinagioma, Kagima shot, your own families, Kagipinchayot, Gaguchimak, Wachipi shot, Chisaki. And with that, I want to thank you very much. But I want to give you a little translation of what I've asked my forefathers, my grandma, my grandpa, to come and join us here today. I've also asked to bring along your forefathers. Come and sit with you as you review what we want our young people to be aware of what's happened in our own lives. So I've asked them, and I've asked the Creator to come in and join us and issue His blessing on us. So with that, Jimmy Gwich. Anyway, I think I'm very privileged to be able to have the opportunity to use my language, because as you know, I almost lost my language, my culture, totally, when I got incarcerated at 7 years old. So I'm now very comfortable to be able to start relearning what I almost lost. And I think that's the biggest genocide we suffered here, is the loss of our identity, our culture, our true being. And it still affects me as a 77-year-old young man. But we've gone through this all our lives. And the disruption in that bliss that we had, the disruption this caused, incredible. It's been incredible. And some of us have been lucky enough to survive up to this point. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my travel into that offered, first of all, awkward and awful existence that I had as a young boy. many Indian residential schools have never spoken about their experiences, and many might never speak about what happened to them. But I think as we come face to face with our young people, there's more of benevolence shown by our young people that this did happen here, although most of it started off as oral history. Fortunately, now we have instances that are put across and through our education system, through the books that we have, and you can hear me, right? Okay. Anyway, imagine the 7-year-old that you know, your child, your sibling, the 7-year-olds that you know. Imagine them leaving your life, and most times forever not seeing them again, or forever not having an opportunity to live the growth of their lives. That's what happened to me as a 7-year-old. The alarm that my little body could not sometimes endure is hard to imagine. You know, I didn't see my parents 10 months of the year. I was incarcerated as a 7-year-old. In this country. And it's really, really almost unbelievable that they could do this to little people, little Canadian people. I still get very emotional when I talk about this. Nate Leipziger and I, a survivor of the Holocaust, often talk about our commonalities of what it took to live that portion of a life when you're that young. I know Nate was a little older than I was when I got incarcerated, but he experienced atrocities that we don't know about. And when I started befriending him and being very close with him, he wondered why a human race would do that, would do what they did to us as young people, as 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. I think I can honestly say that I forever lost the bliss and happiness I had prior to 7 years old. And it's taking me this long. I'm not even done with my life, but I'm still looking at those strategies and those horrors that I experienced. As one of our former great chiefs said, I'm grabbing it by the tail and looking at it straight in the eye. That's how bad it was. You know? When you imagine your little 7-year-old boy or your little 7-year-old sibling, your little 7-year-old nephew or niece, and being taken away from your family circle at that age, in most cases, never to see them again. In my case, I surfaced 10 months later. But the damage already had begun in my life. Because the first 10 months I was in school, I came out that summer holidays. And after a life of love and bliss and honesty in my family circle, I actually hated my grandparents. I hated my mom and dad because they were Indian people. The very, very, very point of what they try to get rid of here because of hate and greed and hunger. So that first 10 months was very effective. And I think in the similarity and the commonality with the Holocaust survivors, it was a loss of identity. People started forgetting who they were. They started not liking who they were, started hiding who they were. So I went through life, hiding the fact that who I was because of what had been taught to me in that first 10 months. And imagine the repetition of this every year. June, the end of June was my most anticipatory time of the year because I would be going home. So for 2 weeks, I underwent the teachings and of how I felt my Indian family. But imagine the horror I used to every year, repetitiously, every September, I was going back to be incarcerated. And it took its toll. It took its toll not only on me, but my colleagues. We have now still effects that people don't know why they are or how they are. From both sides of the fence. Survivors and second, third generation survivors, but also the larger community. They don't know why we do certain things and why we live the way we do. It's that effect. It's that effect which we have passed on. We have a daughter that lives in the States, US of A. I've apologized to her, and she was quite in awe about what it was that I mentioned, what I was apologizing for. And it was the fact that I didn't pass on to her the pride of who I was. So inadvertently, I passed that on. I passed that on to my little girl. And the issue is a lot deeper than that. It affects our whole community. And when I started addressing this, there was a significant, I'll say, kick in the pants in my life when I started really, really looking at what happened with me. And people look at this and say, oh, kind of ridiculous to think that you were specially earmarked to suffer all those consequences. I sat on the shores of the Great Slave Lake in 1969. I was in mineral exploration up in the Northwest Territories. And as I sat on the shores of the Great Slave Lake, I sat on this big log and I thought, I think I can almost visualize Yellowknife across the lake. And I wondered how could I handle me starting to walk across the lake and towards Yellowknife? How long would it be before I would have no knowledge of where I was? And you know what those thoughts are? I didn't want to be here anymore. Thankfully, those little bottles that I lived with, those little brown bottles that I lived with, let me go for a few instances to be able to assess what in the world was I trying to do. So I know I had been talking about in my own mind about the dilemma of what happened to me in residential school. And without really knowing that I was doing certain things, inadvertently I started looking at what happened. I forced myself to look at the spiritual, mental, physical, and sexual abuses that I had encountered up to that age as a little boy. So those never disappear. I lived those. I know when Nate and I talk about the similarities of what it does to our mind to be controlled by an outside force, it's unbelievable. First of all, to think that we would allow that to happen, even though we didn't have a way of controlling that. So, I've been very lucky. And the lifestyle that I had prior to this with the family, up to 7 years old, it's unbelievable. I was under the guidance of our 7 teachings. Love, mostly, respect. Years ago, when I was coming out of my dilemma, not coming out, but surfacing out of what happened to me, I got sidetracked by an elder. An elder that had dealt with this issue for so many years. Unfortunately, he passed on years later. But he recognized, and the reason I want to give you this story is because it's part of our culture, our worldview. We all take the characteristics of one of those 7 teachings, no matter who we are. Each and every one of those 7 teachings are represented by someone from the environment, an animal, or some being. So the name that I acquired at that time, 30, 40 years ago, was Sabe. Sabe, of course, we all know, is a mythical animal, but it's a leader in one of our teachings. The Sasquatch represented honesty. And after several meetings with my elder, he determined that's who I was. So I'm Sabe. And I'm very proud of that because I'm not the only one that's been fortunate enough to inherit that name. There's other people, but there's people that represent the bear, the wolf, the beaver, and they all represent segments of our teachings. Every one of you, I don't know how many people here, maybe 400 or 500. Every one of you, 400, 500 people, have an animal in our culture that represents one of our 7 teachings. So, I don't have time to look at you and say, okay, you're a beaver, or you're a wolf, or you're an eagle. Some elder will come along and look at the characteristics of your own humanity and say, this is who this person is. Every one of you. And we manage somehow to hide those characteristics. And we never experience the joy of who we really are. So I would urge you, if you have a chance, talk to some elder that will look at your characteristics and come back. We even have people that are not part of that 7 teaching. I have a friend. She's a hummingbird because she has the characteristics of a hummingbird that doesn't stop satisfying another being, which is the flower, transferring of nectar. She was amazed. She says, why should I be a hummingbird? And the elder went on and explained very clearly her role in life is to help people attain what they want in life. So that first phase, that first phase up to my 7th birthday, before my 7th birthday, encompassed all those good things that I learned from my grandparents, my mom and dad. Love, language and culture, a feeling of belonging, joy, pride on who I was. And in my second phase, and I think that's where people, Canadian society, started using the term survivor. I wasn't a survivor in my second phase, although I had suffered all the consequences of incarceration, abandonment, loss of language and culture, removal from family, religious and cultural indoctrination, shame and hatred of myself and my family because of who they are. And of course, the abuses that I suffered, the abuses of emotional and spiritual, physical, sexual. Those are real. Those are real. My self-worth was left in shambles. My whole life. I had over 40 jobs in my short life. 40 jobs. And a lot of times I got a reputation by the larger society that I would abandon my jobs. I didn't abandon my jobs. I got to the point because I was trying to prove that I was just as well endowed or capable enough to take on what people gave me. That's why I graduated late. I graduated at 32, side by side with my young mates, 21, 22, 23 years old. It took me that long to get the comfort to say that I could get to that stage. And and the life that I went through in between these phases is incredible. That I don't think that you will not experience any of these life experiences. No matter how well you are going to experience the negativity of what a human being can do to another human being. You know, nobody can escape that. And it was in that third phase that I began to relive my second phase. In my second phase, I adapted to life. I adjusted to what happened. I adjusted to the physical abuses, to the mental, spiritual, and sexual abuses. I adapted to what was happening. And they used to say, where in the hell did you go? In the moon? Can you imagine being sexually abused and you're somewhere, way out somewhere? You don't know what the hell is happening with your body because you've adjusted your little mind. You've adapted to the situation. That second phase is I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody else of what happened in our second phase. Because most people leave this life without going through completing that second phase. And you know, you've heard the statistics across Canada of why Indian people die early. Okay? And they cite various things that, you know, lifestyle, health. And these are the things that when they happen, you adjust your life and you adapt to those things. And they even say, okay, because of accidents or suicide, that's why people's lives are cut short in the Aboriginal community. But I guarantee you, and this comes from a residential school survivor. Most of the accidents that have been cited by society are not accidents. Family members will know the real reasons why people leave and not buy the RCMP or the churches and say, oh, they had an accident. That evening, I was sitting on the shores of the Great Slave Lake. If I would completed my intent trying to walk across that huge lake, the Great Slave Lake, they would have found me next morning and they would have said, oh, he died by accident. By accident. And they wouldn't have no word of what the reason that I left this sphere. And I guarantee you, that's one of the major factors of why Statistics Canada says, oh, Indian people have a shorter lifespan. That's one of the reasons. So, these conjure up awful memories, first of all, of hate and revenge. And that was our biggest tool for surviving this age, that stage. We live with first of all, with the hope that we could continue our hate and have hope of revenge. Can you imagine a young man, 12, 13, 14, 15, strengthening that characteristic in themselves? That's how I felt. So when everything else took over, my dependence on mind-altering friends. And I always refer to those little brown bottles of mine. I have a picture in my book here of my graduation night. And there, you know, this graduation picture is purposely put in there so that I could remember. There's only about 6, 7 of us that graduated that night, but man, goodness sake, right in front of our table. A whole pile of beer bottles. I was so proud of that because it altered my mind. It made me forget that I have to stop myself and go into a barrage of really hateful literature here. When those thoughts return to me, you can't imagine how I feel as an individual and what I want to say. It's not like I'm now that way. That's the way it was. So, fortunately, I lived through that. And my fourth phase is the latter part of what I live now. But when all these remembrances come back in a third stage about what happened, I've lived through my whole life. I'm very, very, very fortunate that my wife and I have been together almost 40 years now. She doesn't look that old, does she? But I met Morgan in my second residential school. And because of my feelings towards the other culture, I didn't even know that she was English, sweet English. So 20 years later, we met again, and we've been together since. But you don't know what I probably put her through in that third phase. Reliving what happened, inadvertently reliving what happened, particularly when I'm sleeping. I sleep in my bed, and people have had nightmares, right? Dreams, good and bad. All through my life, I've had these reoccurring dreams that highlight certain things that happened to me in that second phase. And one of the things that really, really comes back is this dream of where I'm laying in my bed. And the little beds we had in our dormitories were not that big, just enough to sleep. And I remember having dreams for years and years and years. I still have them, of me laying in bed. And I'm sure all of you guys remember the capes that used to be worn by Batman and Superman, and they'd go fly somewhere with their capes, and you would hear, whoosh. And in my dreams, I would come across these faceless robes that had capes, and they would fly across our dormitory. First, he would land on one bed, maybe 4 or 5 away from me, and a little bit of quietness, but then you would hear some little significant movement going around, and some uneasiness, and the sob would come out, and the movement and the sobs would start coming out. And then a little bit of quietness. And then you would see that swish going across the other side, to the other side of the dormitory, to another little bed. Again, you'd experience the same sounds. And they get more and more significant as some of them turn into joy from the person that flew there. Things that describe exactly what's happening on that little bed. Even to the point of hearing little slobbers, slurps. And sobs. There'd be a mixture with sobs by the little guy. And you're laying there and you're thinking, my goodness, is he coming to my bed? And you want to cry out. And sometimes I don't cry out, but sometimes through the graces of my wife, she says, I heard you crying, I heard you cursing. But what happens in this scene is you're laying there anticipating this black robe landing on your bed. And you can't move. You're paralyzed. So often that happens. There's not a damn thing you can do because you're paralyzed. You cry, you sob, you curse. And that's where I'm very, very lucky that I have my wife to gently awaken me from that what I think is reality. and what I know had happened 60, 70 years ago. That's how long it stays with you. Although I've come to the stage where I know I can handle these, they still come back. Anyway, and that's the biggest thing in my healing path. I know things are going to come back. They're going to come regenerate themselves in my life, no matter how old I am. But I continue. In my life now, I'm very happy where I am. I'm not a sad sack or anything like you might look at someone and say, oh, what a sad life. I have a wonderful life. I'm not a sad sack. And I can imagine people that have suffered the consequences of the Holocaust, what they must live through and how they've gone beyond that turmoil. My hat's off to them. Because in a way, that's what I've gone through. And you resolve yourself to look at this. And there's a note in every situation that we have. Less than 10, 15 years ago, one of our cultural activities, characteristics in our communities of Indian people is that when our person leaves, when our family member leaves, we stay with them for 3 days. We don't leave them. And it's a wonderful time in that life. But at the end, when they're celebrating the departure of the individual, we congregate either in a healing circle or in a religious ceremony, and we prepare ourselves to say goodbye. And in this particular case, back in my community, an aunt had passed away. I went to the service, to the church. So, and ironically, the black robe, the priest that was scheduled to conduct the ceremony from that perspective, from the religious perspective, was unable to do it, either because he was sick or he had been called away. So they called in a replacement. So Dennis and I and Richard went in, celebrating the life of our aunt, and we were sitting on sometimes the end of an activity will entail a little feast. So we're sitting on a table, somewhat a little bit bigger than this, and we were sitting on a table. And the priest that I had conducted the ceremony slowly emerged from the back of the church. And we recognized this priest as one of the abusers of our young life. He had abused us. And as he came out in a jovial mode and joking mode, and he saw these 3 young men sitting on this big table along with a couple of other people. And he was going to come over and jokingly come and join us. But he saw the expression on not only our faces, but on our bodies. He turned around, didn't see him again. And so we had a little talk and determined who he was. And without saying why we knew who he was, the abuses that we had suffered under him, he disappeared. So I got it in my mind, I have to track this man down. I'm going to approach him and at least have a little back and forth with him so that he knows that I know of what happened as a little boy. Never found him again. 3 months later, maybe less than 3 months later, I got word from one of my relatives back home and said, you know, guess what? Father so-and-so got killed in a car accident. And of course, I thought, car accident, huh? I wonder if that's the same as what they say about us when we leave, when we have an accident. Maybe the fact that he was such in turmoil of what he had done to these 3 little boys 30, 40 years ago, maybe caused them to have that accident. So I thought I was on my way to healing, dealing with this. But of course, no, it didn't happen that way. I went on with life, and I got another opportunity. I was at a function one night and ran into a good religious person that had been in my second residential school. So we started a sort of a coffee time for us, you know, for the next few months. And one day, her and I were sitting at this place. We're having dessert and coffee at a function where the clergy hangs around. And he said, you know that individual you talk about? The one that was not nice to you? She was very, very kind in her words. She said, the one that was not nice to you? I think that's him over there. Sure enough, it was an abuser that I had encountered as a young boy. And to make a long story short, I'm going to cut this right off, but I'm going to tell you, it got to the point where I actually sat down with him. And you know, the one thing you have to do towards healing is you have to confront what happened. I had done this on my own, but when I started talking to him, eventually we sat down and says, do you remember what you did to me? We're both adults. And after initially not really holding up to the fact that it was him that had abused me, eventually, after subsequent meetings, he admitted that it had been him, but he had been directed by the government to treat us basically as little animals, as little people that were not really part of the family of Christianity. So that took a little bit more time, but we ended up talking again. Subsequently, he said to me in one of these meetings, and he said, after he had admitted, he said to me, Theodore, can you forgive me? Can you forgive me? Well, of course, I couldn't right away. It took more meetings, but eventually, what happened in one of these meetings is that I actually some people will look at that as a sign of weakness, but it was my healing journey. I actually looked at him and said, I forgive you. After all those years living with hate and the thoughts of revenge. And I looked at myself and holy cow, I said, did I just say that? So that's the hardest thing to do when you're healing. When you, first of all, you reconcile to the fact of what happened. But then you look at it realistically and you come to some conclusion. And my conclusion at the time was, I have to clear my head. I know this is the right thing to do. So I forgave him. But you know, if I didn't, imagine what my life would have been if I didn't come to that stage. I might have lost him to an accident like I did the first one. But it really, you don't understand what it does to an individual when you clear that garbage from your mind. And I think that's why I'm still here at 77. Pretty old, huh? Well, not as old as some people that come to this stage. But I don't know too many survivors from the residential schools that get to that age. So I'm very proud of that. Very proud of that. My wife knows the path I've taken. My daughter superficially knows what happened in my life. You know, she was part of the garbage that I went through, and I was living those years of hate and thoughts of revenge. So, anyway, we all have a path there, but I look at Nate Leipziger, and when he describes his time laying in those slab dormitories, I've called him my brother. Nate and I have become very close. And any kind of damage that's being done to your mind and your body, you have a way of cleaning that. You have a way of repairing that. We call it now reconciliation. When the word came up, I used to say, bullshit. There's no such word as reconciliation. Now it's being used, reconciliation is being used almost like an everyday word. Our politicians use that without really meaning what it means. But we all have to go through that, and my purpose in life now is to be able to help people come to the conclusion that there is a way out. There is. And you have to drop off some of the characteristics that we've developed over the years because of that. So again, I'm gonna ask you if you have any questions, and no question is minimal, or every question has a reason. I'll tell you something. We go to schools now, you know, and elementary schools, high schools, and we end up with sometimes 20 people, 20 kids. And when I come to the stage of asking them if they have any questions, if there's 20 children in front of me that are grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, and more particularly the younger ages, if I ask them if they have a question, if there's 20 kids there, you're going to have 40 hands that showed up. So there's no bad question. If there's something.
If you'd like to ask a question, remember what we did this morning. We've got the microphone set up right there, so please come on down and ask your questions. I'm sure you have many.
Hi. Oh, sorry, too loud. I was wondering, after you finished the residential schools, did you ever reconcile with your parents and grandparents? Because you said that you have hated them because they were First Nations. So did you ever fix that, or is that still hanging?
Certainly did. This was my mom entered residential schools in 1914. And she was there until, 1927, June of 1927. She married my dad in September, without us knowing what the story was of her life previous to that. She had been put in there because her dad had lost his wife, my granny, Sarah. So he wanted to take her somewhere to be kept. So she was there. We don't know what happened with my mom. I spent the last 8 years with her when she was suffering from Alzheimer's, and she would make little sounds, little comments about what happened. That's the closest I got to what happened with her. But I guarantee you, things did happen to her too. But I ended up loving my grandparents, really loving my whole family.
Okay, thank you.
Bozu Sabe, Wapsum Kokosa Netakosa Kanepoa, and Dunchi, Barons River First Nation Treaty 5. Before I ask my question, I want to acknowledge your words at the beginning of your presentation, honor our Muslims and Kookums that are here with us today, honor Kitsay Manitou, and our spirits. My question that I have to ask is, how do we unite our people despite the intergenerational effects of residential schools and continued oppression under things like the Indian Act or the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, to name a few?
I think the term reconciliation, I think that's where the solution lies. But the term has to be real. They can't just call politicians, they rattle it off. Or if there's a conflict somewhere in the country, reconciliation means that we don't go back to the situation where it is. We go beyond that and create the solutions that we have. But nobody, particularly politicians, nobody listens to what the reality is of teachings, the teachings that we have. We have to look at each teaching on its own and say, okay, and put it across to a situation and say, okay, how we talk about this, so how do we achieve that in that particular scenario? I know I was a chief in late 70s, early 80s, and you go there with set goals, but they know how to keep you busy. So you don't have a set time to be able to pursue all that. Okay, some of the developments that happen, I could tell you stuff that happened to me while I was a chief. That happened to my people, but it's so sad that they don't even consider the way we've lived, prior to when that sailor got lost in 1491. And we're going back to that. We are going back to that. And it's people like you, our young people, that are going to lead us out of there, out of that barrel. Everybody was put in the barrel. And as people tried to get out of the barrel, they were pulled down. And it was people that had suffered the consequences of residential school. So we have to look at it realistically. And we can form our own methods of clarification on how we should live. We're getting there. I want to thank you and your generations for helping us with that. Miigwech.
I just wanted to ask, how did you feel when you left the residential school system, and then how did you feel about when the last residential school was closed?
When I left residential school, I was gone. I effectively never went home again, although I went home and accidentally got elected as chief. But when I left school in 1960, I was effectively gone, and I was very, very fortunate that I could put on a pair of skates and go play in different locales. But playing hockey, that was always hidden in my life. They'd ask me, I'd be interviewed, and they'd say, "Where are you from?" Not once did I ever say, "I'm from Saging First Nation." But I would highlight the surrounding town. I would say, "Oh, I'm from Pine Falls." And it was the effect, one of the major effects of residential school. I didn't want to be known as having come from a reserve. So effectively, I ran away until I started reconciling and coming back to my own life. I'm very comfortable now. As you heard previously, I couldn't even say, "Ani Nichiogan." I can say, "No, Ani Nichiogan." Or I can say, "Tansi." I'm not ashamed to use that language because it's very unique. So that's the stuff I was running away from as a young man. I'm back now. I never thought I'd come back to Canada. I mean, Manitoba. But I couldn't be more proud now to be sitting here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I couldn't be more proud of that now. So it takes work. It takes work. Reconciliation as we know it. I was sad when the last school was closed because we never had a chance. I never had a chance to go back to my four-story residential school in Saging, to go and be able to at least have a smudge in some of those rooms of abuse that I had. So I was a little sad, but they're well entrenched in my mind. And unfortunately, I'm getting to the point of forgiveness. Jimmy, wait.
Thank you.
So my question is, how did you recover from your traumatic experience in residential school?
Well, I started off with my idea of thoughts of hate and hate first of all, but I used to devise in my mind ideas of revenge. Okay? And I started really growing out of that. And now I've confronted an abuser. And my bottom line has been to that abuser, I forgive you. But it takes dedication to get there. that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, so I'm more of a writer than a speaker, so I put my thing on here. First, I'd like to say that both you and Edith are really strong people to not be able to hold hatred in your hearts. I'm only 15 and still having trouble with that, so thank you for your inspirational speeches. My question is, what inspired you to take back your identity?
Well, I always had my identity. I knew who I was, but it was way down there. It was garbage. And I've gone through life being called a quitter. But I wasn't a quitter. It was the idea that I only went to certain stages to prove that I could be there. So I've gone beyond that now. This is one of the proofs. Okay? I always thought, somebody else should know what happened with us. And this is a very small book, as you can see. But it highlights every phase of my life in that book, of what it took me to get to the conclusion that it did happen. So I'm not a writer, but there's something I have to tell people. When I first wrote an indication of what happened to me, I had it in the Winnipeg Tribune. I think you're too young to remember the Winnipeg Tribune. But when I wrote a little article in the Winnipeg Tribune, incognito, I got a call from the north of DePaul. An individual said to me, it was an incognito, which means I didn't put my name to it. But the editor had talked to me and understood why. The individual that called me said, Theodore, thank you very much for writing that. Is that you that wrote it? So I had to admit. So it indicated to me that anything that you come face to face with helps somebody else. So it helped him. And through my latter life, I find instances where it helps people because of what I tell them what happened.
Another thing I'd like to say is that I have a situation that's going on in my life, so your speech really helped me today, and I found a solution to it. So thank you.
Wow.
Hi. So when you talked about this, it kind of really hit close to home because my dad, he also went to residential school in Fort Alexander, and my question was it hard for you to talk about at first?
It was well hidden under a table. Well hidden. You're from Fort Alec, eh? What's your dad's name?
Mark Kershane.
Okay. I'm aware of Mark. So, it's hard to get there. It's hard to get there. Even now, I'd like to make my presentations from under a table so that I want to do it incognito. But you have to look at it, like I said, like Grand Chief Dave Kershane said, we're looking at the problem and we got it by the tail and we're looking it right in the eye. Just remember that phrase, okay? The garbage that you see is garbage, but you're dealing with it.
Miigwech.
No. So some things that you suffered and experienced in your past, what would you relate that to things that happen in the present?
Well, it's more subtle now very subtle. You know, you really, really, really have to look at things that happen now, and they haven't disappeared. The attack on identity, okay? We're all from different generations here. And our worldview is that we all belong to that circle of the 4 colors, okay? You have to be able to come to the conclusion that I am part of that circle. And we're going to encounter still ignorance out there. And that's what it is. Sometimes you address that ignorance, and all the other garbage that comes with that starts disappearing. But we have to live true to what we believe in. That's the way I've lived.
Thanks.
Hi. My question is, how did you have siblings that went to residential schools with you, and how did you feel that you couldn't talk to them?
I had 3 older siblings, 11, 9, and 10. And I was born 9 years after they had gone to residential school, because of the devastation it had caused my mom and dad, because they lost their last one, and I came in about a year later. So because of the loving nature of our circle, our family, they were so lost without little people, their little people around them. That's when they started the second. I'm the oldest of that second batch. There was 3 and then 4. But when I was a little boy, my brothers and my sister would come home in the summer, and absolute quiet, no mention of school. But they had the capacity to read their comic books. And I would snuggle up to them in their little beds or on the floor, and they would pull away because of what they had learned at school. But that was one of my impetus. That's where the love stayed in my case. They still loved me, but they were scared to express that love. And we lost that part, that capacity when we entered residential school. I was like that at 4, 5, 6. And then it's hard to explain what happened later on. That we were very, very hesitant to give our siblings a hug. Even my granny, I had a hard time giving her a hug. And we had grown up very close to them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, so my question is, do you have any advice for people who potentially want to either start learning a language that has been lost by their family because of the effect of residential schools? Like, for me, all I know is that I'm Cree. I don't know much else because my mom didn't really tell me until I was in like 3rd grade, and it was for the purpose of, hey, you can get scholarships later on in life if you tell them this. And I don't really know much about myself in that aspect, like at all. So do you have any advice for people who might want to start learning about their culture that's sort of just been pushed behind them or anything like that?
Well, the first thing you do, you find another Cree, okay? Even if you don't like them. Okay? And start practicing. Like, my wife is not Ojibwe, but we talk all the time pretty well, and I can't swear at her anymore. So, you know, but we talk about things, you know, and That's the only way to learn. Then we have language classes. We find various little outlets in the city that have what you call language classes or language tables. And we go to these. And you know, once you start realizing what this means, our languages are very, very much alive. They're more descriptive than English. And some of the things you recognize that come out of the languages are very, very unique, because we don't have descriptions of what some of the English languages portray. Like, I'll give you an example, a weird example. We don't have words for bathrooms or toilets. So we always had words for those, but they were more descriptive. Like when we go to the bathroom, we say, I'm going to go to the bathroom. But mizi gamigong is not bathroom or washroom. Does anybody here have a clue about Ojibwe? Mizi gamigong? And they're not meant to be bad, but they're more descriptive. The literal translation for mizi gamigo is shithouse.
Fun.
So we have and we don't look at these words as bad, but it's descriptive. I would encourage you, talk to someone that you and force them to learn. Okay?
Thank you.
Hi. For me, a lot of my family members are Aboriginal, but unfortunately they still feel a lot of that shame about who they are. So I want to know if there's any way that I can help them to release some of that and start to be proud of who they are.
Well, if you have, like, you're starting here, you're talking to somebody that experienced that garbage. Go talk to them that you talked to someone that had experienced that in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even right up to now. And it takes a little bit of, I think, I won't say, it takes some initiative just to be able to bring that across. You have to look at it like reconciliation. You look at it directly. You look at it in the eye. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
One last question.
Hi, have you had any fun memories with your friends?
Do I have fond memories of my friends? Oh yeah, we're a very close clique. You know, there isn't that many people that I went to school with, in this, even in Sinamboya on Academy Road, but the friendships are so deep. We used to go out in the yard and talk our language without anybody knowing what we were talking about. Although it was, they tried to stop that. So I'm very close to my colleagues in those years.
Thank you.
Chimiwech.
Theodore and Morgan, thank you, miigwech. You have inspired us with your experiences, with your wisdom, and I can't help thinking after listening to Edith in the morning how important and sometimes connected both of your messages were, and I know that all the students will have learned so much today. I wanted to leave the final word to one of our educators, Eran Plotnik, who is also a member of the Holocaust Education Committee, a teacher at Sturgeon Heights, and a longtime promoter of Holocaust education, and a second generation.
Okay, good afternoon, students, teachers. Thank you for coming here. As mentioned, my name is Eran Plotnik. I am a son of survivors and a teacher at college, Sturgeon Heights Collegiate. Edith, toda raba. Theodore, magwich. Students, and this is very critical. We live in Winnipeg, and I'm going to tie it all together. My colleagues here will tell you, Plotnik, land the airplane. We're going to run out of fuel, so I'm going to be very quick here. They're going to give me the thumb up and thumb down. Assiniboia Residential High School is here in Winnipeg. How many of you, are you aware of the location? Upper middle class neighborhood, River Heights, Tuxedo, bordering St. James, between Academy Road and Wellington Crescent. Go see, visit, the building is still there. I want to continue by saying this. Students, you have listened to testimony from 2 survivors recounting, reflecting on the tragic event of the Holocaust and the Indian residential schools. Students, it's important to understand this event were a direct result of a state-sponsored policies and action. Democracy is very simple. You're going to be electing your officials very soon. They make policies, and sometimes things do go wrong, very wrong. So something to reflect and remember. There are a few points that I would like to sort of like share with you before we go home, food for thought, something warrant a serious consideration, or something that we need to do to repair the world. In Hebrew we say tikkun olam, and here are some of the points. Stand up for hatred, never be a bystander, rather an upstander. And when you become aware of perpetrators or an offender act, do something. And you've heard it before. Don't let negative bad experiences of the past to be a life sentence, but rather a life lesson. Trust me, it will make you will grow, you become more resilient, you will be able to fight back in the future. Take time to learn about the past whenever you can. Knowing the past will help you understand the present. It will guide you through the future. Edith Eger, a Holocaust survivor, a psychologist, she wrote a book recently. We've heard it here just earlier before. And in her book, The Choice, she said, I was victimized, but I'm not a victim. So remember, being a victim is a choice. Make a good choice. Choose wisely. Don't be a victim. In today's world, we tend to track something as equally as important, and there are very, very current issues that are in our mind, but I want to remind you, please take a moment to care about people, not just about the environment. Envirocide or ecocide or genocide are all acts that people like us create. So balance, take care of people, take care of the environment equally. Evil, thank you. Evil resides everywhere, here in the city, in this province, in this country, not just in faraway places like Rwanda, Darfur, Kosovo, Myanmar. The list goes on and on about faraway places, but let's look at ourselves, reflect, and remember. May it be a man gunning down women in Montreal Polytechnic, the never-ending saga of missing murdered Aboriginal women, a homegrown terrorist who gunned down Corporal Nathan Cirillo while standing on guard at the National War Museum in Ottawa. An intruder who broke into a mosque in Quebec, killing worshippers, daily anti-Semitic attacks on Jews across the nation, and just recently, again and again, Senator Beyak. And remember, senators are elected for life. And she said about the Aboriginal people of Canada, abundance of good came out of Canada's residential school. Something to think. And most recently, in Beausejour, home to many people who came from the Ukraine, or people who themselves suffer a genocide, a white supremacist in Canadian military uniform targeting us all. When you add all the minority groups that are targeted, the sum is the majority. We are the targets. Think about it. You add all the minorities and it becomes the majority. So we are victims. We have to fight. We have to do something about it. And the last one. In recent decades, Canadian identity, in my opinion, shifted away. We tend to identify ourselves more than ever as the true north. Every night when I go to the arena just before the Jets game, everybody yelled, True North. But I want to remind you this. Every morning we stand and we sing, Oh Canada. And there are two lines, the most important in my opinion. We stand on guard for thee. And we repeat it twice. So my question to you, my challenge, what will you stand on guard for? What is your thee? What is your commitment for action? What will you do? What will you stand on guard for? Here locally and abroad globally. In the spirit of True North, remember, no one snowflake ever take a blame for the avalanche. So if we do it together, we can fight back. This is your homework assignment for the day. Go on, take on life, and stand on guard for thee. Thank you very much. Drive safe.
Safe home, everyone.